Perfect. Okay, so to everyone who's just waiting, probably going to start in, well, I think we should probably start now, actually. Welcome to everyone. This is our LTD's second talk of the term. For people who haven't been with us before, welcome. And then hello again to everyone who's a regular member. Just as a quick aside, I'm just going to plug the rest of the stuff the society does. We also have weekly debate sessions every Wednesday from 7 o'clock. You can find the details of all of that, Discord links, Zoom links, or in our on our Facebook page. So it's just Liberate the Debate Sussex. And tonight we have Elizabeth Hobson here with us, who is an anti-feminist activist. She was part of Ladies for Philip Davies and has helped organize a number of men's rights conferences. I think I'll let Elizabeth give herself a bit more of an introduction, just say what projects she's done before, and then just get cracking with the talk. And then afterwards, we'll open up a Q&A so you can shoot some questions Elizabeth's way. But yeah, take it away, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks to everybody for coming. It's nice to see so many friends round and about. And yeah, so currently, since last May, or well, 2 years ago, I became the Director of Communications for a political party called Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them. And last May, our party leader stood down and appointed me the new leader. So that's what I'm up to at the moment. And I'm also working towards the International Conference on Men's Issues 2020, which should have been in a vineyard just outside of Sydney. But COVID happened, so it's actually going to be virtual on YouTube, but it'll still be great, just possibly with slightly less divine wine. I don't know. We might be able to fix that. We'll see.
Thank you very much. I think everything's working perfectly at the moment. So yeah, Elizabeth, take it away with your talk, and then we'll stop afterwards for a little Q&A, and I'll explain to everyone how that works then. So yeah, go on.
Okay, thank you. So, I am a progressive woman and I reject regressive politics. Most particularly relevant to what I want to talk about tonight, I reject feminism. The position of women in the past has included disadvantages that any liberal is glad to consign to the dustbin of history. Denial of the human right to vote for representatives, denial of access to certain forms of education and certain professions, lower pay too often. Women were also at the mercy of nature when it came to their reproductive career. And I would strongly argue that the impact of feminist activism on the progress that has been made in these spheres is entirely overblown in common misrepresentations of history. But regardless of that, I'm here to talk about the here and now. And here and now, the kindest thing that can be said about feminism is that it served its purpose. And if it served its purpose, then I guess we don't need it around anymore. And yet, feminism lingers like an offensive smell. It debases women, it tortures men, it damages the bonds between women and men. It prevents our society from achieving the sex equality that we need, deserve, and owe, both to the brave men and women who've come before and bequeathed this relatively flourishing and free civilization to us and to our children. It destroys vital familial bonds, and feminism kills. I'm not being hyperbolic. If you look at suicide rates, you will find that divorced men are significantly more likely to kill themselves. And given the fact that they're significantly more likely to be unjustly prevented from continuing meaningful relationships with their children, a situation established, extended, and entrenched by feminist lobbying, I, for one, am not surprised. Seeger and Barry found that positive attitudes to masculinity protect men's mental health and even provide a barrier against suicidality. Would anyone seriously deny that mainstream feminism has been concertedly eroding positive attitudes to masculinity for decades? Then there's the Me Too movement, a witch hunt with a body count. From Benny Fredrickson, who killed himself over unsubstantiated allegations, to Carl Sargent, who killed himself over allegations he wasn't even privy to Jill Messick, who killed herself as a result of bullying after she defended Harvey Weinstein. Feminists tell us that women are disadvantaged as compared to men, even in the UK today. So let's just think about that for a while. We're a country that condones forced genital mutilation only when it's perpetrated against boys. We're a country with radical feminist ideologues given free rein to indoctrinate our children with toxic feminist narratives about the apparently innate problematicness of masculinity, and who diagnose in our boys a kind of original sin born from the alleged sins of their forefathers against their foremothers. A country where women dominate university entry and outnumber men in most subjects, but all we hear about is how there are too many men in physics, technology, and mathematics. A country where there are workplaces that prioritize hiring women through quota systems, regardless of whether there may be superior candidates who are men. Positive discrimination for one group necessarily equates to plain old discrimination against those outside of the protected group. A country where men fulfill almost all the dangerous and dirty jobs and constitute 98% of workplace deaths. A country where men constitute 84% of rough sleepers. A country where men are disadvantaged in the criminal justice system, where they are treated so much more harshly on account of the aggravating factor of being born male. A country where too many fathers and children are denied meaningful access to each other when parents separate. These are significant disadvantages to which our society responds with a cultural shrug. All the while, tearing their hair out because Carrie Gracie was paid less money for doing less work than John Sopel. If our patriarchal overlords are really trying to privilege men in our society to the detriment of women, they're sure doing a terrible job. Feminism tells us that it's a movement that cares about men too. But when do you see feminist campaigns against anything that I've just mentioned? And could the reason that people conclude that feminism is about man-hating be anything to do with feminist man-hating? Andrea Dworkin, only when manhood is dead, only then will we know what it is like to be free. Robin Morgan, man-hating is an honourable and viable political act. The oppressed have a right to class hatred against the class who is oppressing them. Naomi Wolf, looking how easy it is to hate men is oddly liberating. Julie Burchill, the most fun part of being feminist is about frightening men. Scaring the shit out of scumbags is amusing and necessary. Feminism tells us that it speaks on behalf of women. Feminists call their movement a sisterhood. Yet the more I learn about feminism, the more I see that its members are overwhelmingly cliquey, mean girls ready to throw any woman under the bus who goes her own non-feminist way. I went to feminism for equal rights and sisterhood and found neither. What I found was sisters railing against women solicitors who represent alleged rapists. I found sisters belittling stay-at-home mothers. I found sisters dogpiling glamour models on Twitter, sisters who have successfully achieved the banishment of walk-on girls from many sports events in recent years, because for these sisters, better representation of women apparently means fewer women. As an outspoken critic of feminism, personally, I find that the vast majority of misogyny that I experience comes from feminists. Their latest dog whistle being the phrase, "pick me," which apparently denotes a woman who rejects feminism because she wants to curry favour with men. It strikes me as a blatant form of slut-shaming, which is unbecoming at the best of times, never mind when engaging in it makes you not only unpleasant, but also a massive hypocrite. And what does feminism do for its female adherents? It weakens the women who subscribe to it, makes them neurotic, bitter, dysfunctional, trains women to think in every way that a decent therapist would try to train people out of. Emotional reasoning, letting feelings guide their interpretation of reality, which of course is what would guide the court's interpretation of reality if misogyny is made a hate crime. Catastrophizing, focusing on the worst possible scenario and seeing it as most likely. Overgeneralizing, perceiving patterns of negatives based on single incidents. Dichotomous thinking or black and white thinking. Mind reading, assuming they know what people think without sufficient evidence. Labeling, assigning negative traits unjustly. Negative filtering, focusing exclusively on negatives, ignoring positives. Blaming, focusing on others as the source of their own negative emotions. These are not healthy ways to think, but feminism doesn't care. Women are tools for this toxic ideology. Feminism tells us that it's an equality movement, but how many of its leaders are working class? It's led by middle-class women with middle-class problems and middle-class sensibilities. You just don't hear working-class women crying on Twitter because a brickie called them gorgeous. Because it is led by these women with middle-class sensibilities, though, it has a disproportionately harmful impact on the working classes. The working classes report more socially conservative views than the middle classes, and yet it's their families more than any other demographic that are being ripped apart by the influence of state institutions that penalise low-earning couples for being together in their attempts to support single mums, ripped apart by the influence of feminists insisting that when a woman's relationship is in crisis, it's not a problem worth working through. She's actually definitely being victimized and needs to go nuclear and destroy what's been built, regardless of how proportionate or disproportionate that may be. The good news, though, is that feminism, with its prejudice, bigotry, and consistent campaigns to privilege women, is in trouble. According to the Fawcett Society in 2016, feminists only represent 9% of the population, and just as thrillingly, BuzzFeed and YouGov found in 2019 that a third of young people hold what they consider to be anti-feminist views. For example, that feminism is to blame for making some men feel marginalized and demonized in society. While the movement maintains its stranglehold on many sectors of our society, including the legacy media, more and more people are rejecting feminism every day. In 2017, the Women's Equality Party poured money and resources into a campaign to unseat Parliament's champion for men and boys, Philip Davies, in his Shipley constituency. Mainstream media hammered the message that the man is a misogynist and inflated WEP's leader and candidate Sophie Walker, yet Philip Davies won a resounding victory while WEP lost their deposit. Laura Bates estimates that the manosphere numbers tens of thousands in the UK and notes that we are the kind of people you can pass on the street on a daily basis, never knowing that we hold heterodox views. We are everyday Jane and Joe. We're not feminist and we're not going away. We are dropping pebbles into the pool in all kinds of interactions, from speeches like this one to throwaway comments that we might drop into conversations with friends and family. We are building a public square effect wherein before long, everybody is going to know that feminism is a paper tiger that can be safely criticised and mocked and discarded. And then, when it is commonly accepted that feminism is a toxic, hate-filled supremacy movement, and that adherents to this movement can be sidelined like racists, we can begin the process of healing our society from feminist ravages. We can begin to build on the awesome legacy of the Enlightenment and the classical liberal ideas that have made our society so much fairer, but can still be pushed further. We can have equality of opportunity, equal rights, both on paper and in practice. We can flourish in systems based purely on merit and free choice. We can come back together as men and women, loving and supporting each other. The anti-feminist future is ours for the taking, and here's to the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. I will ask people, I know you're all muted at the moment, but not to clap on camera just because we've tried it before and it sounds awful. But now we're going to move on to my favorite part of the evening, which is the Q&As. So I'm just going to give a quick little rundown of how this is going to work. So if you guys go onto the participants tab, you can see that there are, at the bottom, there should be a bunch of emojis that you can use. If you'd like to ask a question, just click on the yes one or the one of a raised hand, and I'll go down my list. I can see all the participants here, and I'll unmute you, and then you can ask your question to Elizabeth and hopefully get a bit of a dialogue going. So yeah, feel free to do that now. Okay, so the first one we got here is from Ruby.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Ruby. Yeah, you've seen me already, but I'm a feminist.
Okay.
And so, I disagree with most of the points you made, but it was more this idea of feminism being not necessary. Feminism over the years has sort of changed and evolved, and I'd say that now we're in like a fourth wave feminism, where it's so much more than just men and women. It's not just cis het working class white women being the same as men. You think about primarily, like, what about trans women, for example? And it is impossible to say that trans women have the same rights as a lot of cis het men, especially upper class cis het men. It's when you bring into, it's not just feminism that we had in the 60s. Feminism now is so much more progressive when we bring into it race, trans rights, LGBTQ rights. How would you respond to that?
It's not entirely, I know, what you're saying, and what you're saying is absolutely true. Feminism is intersectional now, and it takes on all of these different issues and, characteristics that, some of which are very important, some of which might be less important. But it's not clear to me what relevance feminism has with regards to race or with regards to the experience of trans women. And to be perfectly honest, I see it less as a sincere desire to make people free and equal, and more as a cynical ploy to bring together a group of people in order to, who will accept making cis, hetero, white men the problem. It seems, you know, for me, feminism is not about women. It's not about Black women or coloured women or trans women. It's about an ideology that wants power. You know, it's all about Carrie Gracie and women in Parliament, you know, women CEOs. I don't see what relevance feminism has to the everyday woman on the street. I think it harms the everyday woman on the street without any consideration or concern. And
Okay. Sorry.
Oh no, feel free if you've got a follow up.
Yeah.
I think it's every woman, no matter their gender, no, every woman, no matter their race, their sexuality, is being oppressed by. It's not men that that feminism hates. It's not men that we hate. It's the heteronormative patriarchy that is oppressing every single woman. Every single woman. Some more than others, but it's the heteronormative patriarchy that it's we're fighting against.
Can you, because I find it difficult to identify how women as a class, every single woman is being oppressed. I don't see that at all. I see women living free lives, able to do exactly what they want to do. In fact, I see women having more rights and privileges than men.
There's absolutely this idea that in certain circumstances there are some women who have more who are more privileged than some men, and that's not I can't disagree with you with that but for example, you talk about male suicide. So you talk about male suicide. The reason why male suicide rates are as high as they are isn't because of women. Feminists never wanted that, never caused that. It's because of the heteronormative patriarchy that has evolved over time. That is the reason, and feminists are critical of that.
See, I think that's an absolutely misguided idea, and the reason I think it's a misguided idea is because the research I referenced by Martin Seeger and John Barry, they discovered that positive attitudes to, there you are, positive attitudes, all the boxes changed around, positive attitudes to masculinity, including, you know, traditional masculinity, were very healthy for men. And, you know, men who had negative attitudes towards masculinity were more likely to commit suicide. And, you know, feminism has just been throwing negative ideas about masculinity, you know, toxic masculinity, hegemonic masculinity, cis, heteropatriarchy. I don't think this is helping men and their mental health at all.
How about we have feminism and women achieving the equal rights that we need, as well as acknowledging insecure masculinity, and then not having because it's just another area in life that we need to work for. And as a feminist, I don't want there to be high suicide rates against men, and I agree with you there, but I don't think that feminism is the reason, and I do think some men need to be held accountable for their acts.
Feminism is necessary. I wouldn't go so far as to say feminism was the reason that men are committing suicide. I would say that it has not helped big time in some areas, you know, with regards to lobbying and pushing and entrenching the situation in family courts, where too many men and children are not given meaningful access to each other. you know, I think that has a massive impact on the male suicide rate. And, you know, as a mother, I can completely understand why. If I was denied access to my children, I probably, you know, would be likely to have, you know, suicidal thoughts myself. But you did mention that, you know, why don't we have feminism and get women the equal rights that we need? But what rights do women need in UK today?
Well, I think this is this is where I bring into sort of intersectionality more, in terms of, for example, white women and black women. Black women are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth. Right,
I didn't know that.
No, that's definitely in the US. I don't know how bad it is in the UK, but I know that it's stuff like that where, okay, white women have been are quite on a level setting right now, but you can't just give up there.
Right. But why do you know?
Sorry to interrupt just quickly. I would just say, if you two would be able to wrap this up just quickly, just because I'm conscious other people want to ask questions.
Well,
I
want
to give everyone a chance.
Ruby, let's connect after if you'd like.
Yeah, I quite like that. Thank you.
I would just say just quickly, I've noticed in the chat there are some people who are liking to voice some opinions. So I would propose that a more productive way to do this would be, if people want to stay around after the talk is done, I would be happy to moderate a session like we normally do on our Wednesdays, where the people who are in the chat at the moment can stay and have a dialogue with the people that are disagreeing with them. However, I would ask you to leave that until after the session. But again, I'm happy to moderate that if anyone wants to stay behind. At the moment, anyone who wants to ask another question, just shove those little emojis in the chat and I will come to you. And if there's no one at the moment, then I wouldn't mind asking a question.
Oh, Charlotte has one too, but you can't use them.
Okay, I'll unmute Charlotte then.
I unmuted myself, sorry.
Oh.
Love you, Tom. So my question would be, so you mentioned before that intersectionality has definitely come into feminism. And also that you think that feminism is being kind of headed by middle-class women.
Yes.
Which, to an extent, I do agree with, because I think that feminism, especially the feminism that gets put in the media, is headed by middle-class white women who are normally straight. And I think there's a huge amount of privilege in that, and they do only really progress those issues that affect them. So it'll be something like the wage gap is a massive one, which people promote, and things like that. And my issue with that is that because of the way that the media does it, it's seen as like the only issue that feminism argues against. Whereas if you go to kind of grassroots, and I know like a lot of the people who I'm friends with who are feminists, including myself, because I am, well, I consider what I am. I'm, you know, a mixed brown woman, and I'm queer, so I kind of like tick a lot of boxes. But I find that a lot of feminists are very much progressing in the sense of supporting working class women and supporting brown and black women and supporting disabled women and supporting also like male sexual assault victims and going against the ways that the patriarchy negatively affects men. But what I don't really see is that support from men. And I think that there's an idea which women are always kind of considered that they have to support everyone. They can't be exclusive. They can't promote their own ideas and issues, whereas men can kind of push their own and still get supported by women, and they're not obligated to support women. And I was just kind of wondering your theories on that. So there's a lot of information. And
no, that's all very interesting. And I'm curious as to in what way you and the your feminist friends are supporting like working class women. What are the issues that you're campaigning on their behalf, for? But I mean, with regards to the idea that men, I mean, there was it, Mike, can you give me a nod if I've got the right date? Was it at the first International Men's Day debate 2014? well, I'm not sure. A couple, not so
And
long
that was
ago.
a yes.
Yes, 2014. Yes, and Philip Davies applied for it, and then he had to go into a session with like the backbench business committee and try to convince them that it was necessary. And Jess Phillips pointed out that men are always raising issues in this house. And Phillips said that there's a big difference between men raising issues and men's issues being raised. And, you know, what I see from men is a real selflessness. You know, I mean, men do all the dangerous and dirty jobs, you know, to keep our society functioning and to bring home bread for their families, you know. And I see men in all kinds of spheres looking after women and children, looking after specific demographics. I very rarely see them advocate on behalf of men as a class personally. I mean, I say very rarely, obviously, it's what I spend my days doing, so I do see it because I'm in this movement. But, you know, as far as the whole of society goes, I think it's quite rare. Do you want to come back on that, Charlotte?
I was just going to say, like, thank you, obviously, for responding and everything and taking the questions. For me, I think I was looking a lot into how it affected. So you mentioned, first of all, like how we're supporting working class women. And I was on a workshop over summer where they were talking about how feminism, especially within the Black community, is helping with kind of grassroots in working class communities, and how they have like a community fund. So if like a certain flat can't afford or like needs a new washing machine or something, was an actual real life example that they had. They'd kind of do a little like whip around and raise money for that, and that was done a lot by, you know, it was headed a lot by the women in the community to support other women.
Right.
So it's kind of things like that I see a lot. But I think my question was specifically from the Black Lives Matter movement, and how there was a lot more kind of Black men pushing forwards like racial issues, which is of course important, but it did seem that the Black women got ignored. And you can see it in the way that people reacted to Breonna Taylor's death and the way that people reacted to, say, George Floyd's. And, you know, it's one of those things where I do have to kind of stand by my point that I think there is an obligation for women to help everyone and not be able to kind of push their own issues. Whereas I simply don't see men do the same thing. I simply don't see men support women in the way that they, you know, have the power and privilege to do so.
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating to me that we just seem to have like completely different angles. Like the world you're describing to me is just not the world I see. You know, you bring up George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Well, you know, what about Boko Haram, who, you know, rounded up all the boys in a school, put them inside the building, set the building alight and killed them all. And there was zero media attention for that. They then came back because they'd got no media attention and kidnapped the girls. And then we had like an explosion across the West, you know, with all those bring back our girls hashtags and all of that, you know. And so, yeah, I struggle to empathize with what you're seeing, I'm afraid.
I mean, okay, that's fine. Like I'm finished with that, but thank you for your answer.
Thank you for your question.
Okay, moving on. I see Edward wants to ask a question, and then we'll go to Sam Callahan afterwards. There you go, Edward.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hello.
Hi. So a couple of the feminists on here have mentioned the idea of patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is in my opinion, a essentially a very simplistic and one-dimensional analysis of how our society actually works, because it's just, you know, there, as people have pointed out, there are various inequalities where you could say men are doing better in certain ways. There are also certain inequalities where women are doing better in certain ways, and a few of those have already been mentioned on the chat and on the talk here today. And for me, just to take all inequality that where men are doing better and simply attribute that to something called the patriarchy seems to me just intellectually very, very lazy and one-dimensional and very simplistic, because our society is in fact very complicated, and it might just be that there are some very complicated reasons why these inequalities exist, and not because of some very simple explanation called the patriarchy. So my question for you is, do you think that patriarchy is basically a conspiracy theory?
Absolutely. A conspiracy theory is exactly what I would say it is. You know, you could also say it's a lie, a delusion, a myth. But, you know, it's kind of, so there's a great meme, and it's a triangle, and it says what feminists see, and they see the men at the top here and all the women at the bottom. And then underneath it says what feminism doesn't see, and it's a bigger triangle, and what you see is men at the top, women in the middle, and then loads of men right at the very bottom, you know, which I think is much more accurate. And with regards, you know, I think it just is incredible to me that people will insist, you know, that there is such a thing as a glass ceiling and there are barriers that are preventing women from achieving. I think it's quite clear at this point in history that, you know, enough women have broken through the glass ceiling. So, you know, to suggest that there really isn't one. And as far as I'm concerned, while you can't, you know, I can't look at a woman and know what her personality is like and what her priorities are like, but there are differences between the sexes. And, you know, you have Catherine Hackim's preference theory, which showed that 4 in 7 men are work-centered. They derive the meaning in their life from going to work, from achieving. Only 1 in 7 women are work-centered. You know, and the fact that there's 1 in 7 women means that, you know, there shouldn't be any barriers because they should be able to succeed. But, you know, just from that, we would have more men who are CEOs, more men who are politicians. You know, I mean, the politicians one always makes me laugh, because I think that you have to be kind of insane to want to be a politician. There's got to be something slightly wrong with you. And I always say, you know, the thing is, most men are too sane to want to go into politics. It just so happens that there are a few more sane women.
Yeah, I agree. Can you still hear me? Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yep. So thanks very much, Elizabeth. Much appreciated.
Okie dokie. So Sam will come to you next, and then we'll do Jessica afterwards. There we go.
Hello. I have a very strong interest in the group, because I was one of the people that contacted Mike a bit of time ago about me. So my direct question to you is, would you consider the present state of feminism to be a Mott and Bailey movement?
What, can you explain what a Mott and Bailey movement is to me, please?
So a Mott and Bailey movement describes a movement like the old castle construction of a Mott and Bailey castle, where you'd have a larger keep on a hill, and you'd have a smaller settlement and garrison in a in one position close to the keep. Essentially, this is the surface of the movement, and then the actuality of what it believes is the keep.
Ah, that's a lovely analogy. Yeah, I see where you're going with that. And I do, absolutely. You know, I think that there are your kind of public faces of feminism, and also, you know, your coffee shop feminists who you meet, you know, at school and in the street, and they're, you know, very nice and they just want equality, and they happen to like their women friends, you know, but they don't really, although they represent the movement by design, by calling themselves feminists, they obfuscate the fact that actually feminism has established itself across all of the sectors of society, you know, in government, in the media, in health, in charities, in education. And, you know, what those feminists who aren't necessarily public facing are doing is really sinister, really damaging, and needs to be brought into the light so that the public can have a think about whether this is really the route that we want to go down, whether or not, you know, Laura Bates and Jessica Valenti are pretty and sound reasonable most of the time.
Yeah, that's mainly all I really wanted to ask. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the question. I love that analogy. I might use that.
Okie dokie. Jessica, we'll come to you next.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi, this is actually my question.
I'm
sorry about that. So you mentioned masculinity and men as being positive, like on our like growth and development and like lives, and that feminism was undermining that. If I think I got that correctly.
Sorry, I kind of missed a little bit. Did you say that I said that positive attitudes to masculinity are good for men's mental health?
That masculinity is good for men's mental health, and that feminism is undermining that. I'm not putting words in your mouth in any attempt. I'm like, is that?
Just trying to clarify. So yeah, what I specifically said was that positive attitudes to masculinity, positive ideas about masculinity are good for men's mental health.
Okay.
And yeah, that feminism undermines it. Yeah.
I was just gonna like to contextualize my actual question. As a man who grew up like, you know, in the UK school system, I definitely found that a lot of the peers, like abuse between my peers, was directed like by men to, well, young men towards other young men on the pretext of masculinity. And as we like grew up and we were introduced in workshops to feminism and like how to view masculinity through that scope, it definitely, you know, laid off a bit on the abuse. Like the guys tended to be nicer to each other. And so I just wonder, like, how do you, because in that example, like, you know, masculinity was quite harmful to a lot of young men. And I wonder if you have any views on towards
well, I mean, to be entirely honest, I am someone, you know, and I have 2 boys myself, and one of my greatest pleasures in life is listening to them trash talking each other while they're gaming. And, you know, I think that boys, more so than many girls, have an ability to throw the most creative and inventive and funny insults at each other, and both know that they don't mean it. It depends on context, you know. If it's thrown in, you know, when they're gaming and they're friends, then they know that they don't mean anything, you know, negative by that. Do you not feel that? You don't, you kind of look like you're very skeptical of that idea.
I think I assume your boys are quite young.
Yeah.
You may have a not quite accurate idea of the reality of school bullying between young men. But, you know, thanks for answering my question.
If you want to send me over any more information about that, I'd be willing to have a look and think and talk if you wanted.
Essentially. But thank you for answering.
Pleasure.
Can I ask a question as well?
Sure.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm a woman, and a lot of the worst things that have happened to me have been at the hands of like white men who are maybe in their middle ages, and I'm assuming that's kind of like a big portion of the MRAs. So if I were to join this movement, would I be safe? And do you?
Oh, absolutely. The men's human rights movement is just full of the most honorable, reasonable, kind, compassionate human beings, both men and women, that I've ever met. I've actually been going through a significant period of flux in my life recently, and the support that I've received from the men's human rights movement has blown my mind, and I really struggle to believe that I'd have found it anywhere else. I very much struggle to believe I'd have found support like it in the feminist movement, but you would be entirely safe, yes.
I somehow really doubt that, because I mean, Mike Buchanan managed to say something really rude towards someone in the chat. He immediately went to calling a young woman pathetic, and I just feel like that same energy could be really toxic for a young woman, or even for you. Like, it just sounds a bit damaging, but yeah, I disagree.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think possibly, you know, what we've both or you've both kind of mentioned is like harsh words. And for me, you know, if I don't have a problem with, and the men's human rights movement is a movement absolutely dedicated to free and frank discussion. And so, you know, whether somebody calls somebody else pathetic is not something that I have any feelings on whatsoever. Perhaps she was.
Okay, well, I'm going to go on to other questions now. So I know Michael wanted to ask one, and I see Michelle has her hand up as well. And then after that, I believe Mike would like to weigh in as well. So we'll go to Michael first.
Hi, you all right? Hello. I just wanted to preface my
Oh, muted.
Oh.
Why is Michael muted suddenly?
I'm not sure.
Hello. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I heard you, and then you were muted again, and then.
Oh, okay. Do you know what?
You were about to preface what you were going to say.
Yes, I just wanted to preface. I may or may not have made it slightly late to your speech, so I missed some of it. So if my question has already been covered in your speech, then just tell me, and I'll basically shut up and go away. However, so earlier on, when you were answering some of the questions, the glass ceiling came up, for example, and you asked one of the people who were asking questions, you know, what are some of the issues that women in Britain are facing today? And this is so what I'm going to bring up is that basically is the gender pay gap, because I've heard so many different sides. So, you know, people saying yes, there's a pay gap. Some people saying no, there's no pay gap. And like, honestly, it all gets a bit confusing, to be honest. But so my question is I just wanted to know really what were your thoughts, and if you did bring it up in the speech, I'm so sorry, like genuinely.
No, I didn't cover that. So there is a pay gap, but it's based on the free choices made by men and women. You will see, if you break down the stats, you know, into all the relevant compartments, it's like men and women choose different careers. For a start, men, you know, often choose to work much longer hours, you know, more dangerous, difficult, dirty jobs that will be paid more. And yeah, so there's a pay gap and there's no need to worry. There's also, of course, a spending gap. So women are responsible for like, what is it, 70 or 80% of consumer purchases? Someone must know around here. But, you know, and a lot of that is because women are more likely to do the grocery shopping, but they also, you know, I mean, if you walk to the local shopping centre and count how many shops are aimed specifically at women and how many are aimed specifically at men, you will find that, you know, there's clearly something going on there. I did actually raise this with a feminist once, and because she was talking about how men destroy the planet and they rape and pillage the planet, and it's so awful. And I pointed out that, well, yeah, but it's kind of in a large part to buy things that, sorry, to make things that women want to buy. And she said, yes, I know that's really true. And it was brave of you to raise that. And the reason women want to buy it is because men convince them they need it in advertising. And I'm like, oh my God, like at what point are feminists gonna acknowledge the fact that women have agency?
Honestly, like, thank you so much. Like, I really, like, I'm not like on that high level of IQ to even like respond. Like, I can put my hand up and say that, but I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were. Honestly, thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. Nice to talk.
No worries. Nice. Bye. Bye.
Okay, so we'll go to Michelle next.
Hello. Hi Liz. I'll just try and combine everything real quick. I'm an ex-feminist. I'm familiar with Elizabeth. I've attended Messages for Men the last 2 years. I'm quite disappointed that I don't know what's happening this year. Doesn't look like
COVID
it. But...
happened.
So I'm an ex-feminist. Basically became a feminist in 2014, thanks to Laura Bates, who's cropped back up again. And I attribute my feminism to now I know that I'm on the autism spectrum, and I basically thought that all this kind of new social rules, or what you can and can't say, was just like what I would always been missing out on. I didn't know I was autistic at the time, but I just thought, oh well, this is the new kind of thing. And but it took me down a really dark path. Also kind of related to my own personal circumstances. I was quite isolated, spending a lot of time on social media. And I completely agree with you, Elizabeth, and we've probably spoken about this in person before, but I see feminism as the complete opposite of what you're taught in CBT therapy, of how to recover from negative thinking, negative behaviors, everything that you said in your speech. One question I would ask you would be, how do we help protect vulnerable individuals? Say, for example, people like myself who were isolated, maybe due to personal circumstances, and maybe don't really understand social situations quite as well. I'm, like I said, I was only diagnosed this year. And I would just like to reassure everyone that the men's rights movement is the best group of people I have ever met, the friendliest, funniest group of people I have ever met. You would have no trouble spending many evenings together with all of the guys and ladies that I've met. And if you're worried because they're straight white men, would you be worried if they were straight black men? Would you be worried if they were straight any other race besides white? That's all.
Thank you so much. Your actual questions completely just slipped my mind. What was it? Oh, sorry, of course, I remember.
We would be able to help protect vulnerable individuals from kind of going down a dark path. Especially while feminism seems to be creeping in everywhere, intersectionality seems to be creeping in everywhere. But yeah.
Oh, so you'd mean protect them specifically from feminism?
Kind of feminism and well, that's just my view from my own personal experience. It kind of, and intersectionality kind of just teaches a very negative kind of way of thinking, that you can attribute any kind of seemingly minor interaction with somebody. Oh, it's because of art, it's because I'm this sex, it's because they're this race, or I'm this race, or any kind of combination in intersectionality.
Yeah, I think, you know, the only thing that I know how to do is to keep talking to people, and you know, that's both through events like this and, you know, social media, and also in person. Like, those in-person conversations are incomparable, you know, because people who you know and trust and have a bond with can be the scariest people to open up to, that you're not a feminist. But, you know, those are the ones that you could really kind of meaningfully reach, because they already have that capital of trust in you. And you know, I think that's a really interesting question actually that you raise about, because what I understood as your question was kind of, how do we protect kind of, you know, people with kind of autism, people not recognizing social cues and stuff like that?
Those, and also maybe people who are just maybe in a depressed point in their lives. I do see feminism and intersectionality as a bit of a cult. You know, any kind of cult can prey on vulnerable people who might be not in the best point in their lives, maybe quite socially isolated, like I was myself, due to personal circumstances. And then also both kind of played a part, autism and personal circumstances, depression, and that kind of thing.
And yeah, I think that, you know, I mean, I'm not an expert by any means, but, you know, I would refer to Darren Dioge's International Conference on Men's Issues 2018 speech in London, where he talked about how when we're born, you know, we can't control our body movements, and it takes like practice and patience, and, you know, everybody supporting, you know, the family all supporting the baby to learn how to walk, how to talk, you know, until you get so natural at it. If someone said, how did you do this? You wouldn't be able to tell them, you know, you just did it. It's just a, you know, instinctive kind of action. But he suggests that what we are not doing these days is being patient and supportive of people, especially boys, when they're trying, you know, when they're exploring and practicing how to make emotional connections with people. And so, you know, when someone is socially awkward, I think they receive some pretty harsh punishment for that sometimes, you know, and I think that that's really sad, and it's really not helpful to anyone concerned. And I suppose it would be understanding, you know, we have to be more understanding collectively. And I suppose I would say that, you know, this kind of feminism and radical kind of left-wing ideologies are not teaching patience and tolerance. They're teaching the exact opposite. And so if they are training people to be intolerant and to be, you know, on a hair trigger all the time and always ready to assume that that person's not socially awkward, they want to hurt me, you know, then it's not going to be helpful or conducive to us being able to support people who are socially awkward.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think I remember the speech that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a great one. I love that one. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me participate.
Pleasure to see you.
And you.
Okay, so I see we have a question from Naris here. I just want to quickly ask you, Elizabeth, are you happy taking many more questions, or would you like us to wrap it up soon?
No, I can carry on going. Yeah.
Nice, okie dokie. So Naris.
Hello. Well, my question, let me explain a little bit. The way I see the feminist movement, it emerged as a movement to reclaim the right to define their own identity, like a women's movement. And like also fight other genders, let's say, dictate to be something they want. Like, and a lot of the flaws in the feminist movement at the moment, I see like they're trying to say what the other genders should be, like feminists say what men should be. But my question is, can they keep to themselves, like how do they define identity, or it is impossible to actually for both genders, well, they're not in a vacuum basically. Can both genders define their identity without the other gender participating in it?
Right, that's a really interesting question, actually. And, you know, for me, there's a Claire Booth Luce quote that I will try to remember that I actually found in a Christina Hoff Sommers lecture from the 90s on YouTube years ago, and it's always stuck with me. And the quote was, "It's time to leave the question of women up to Mother Nature. What is in their nature, they will do, and you won't be able to stop them. And what is not in their nature, they will not do, and you will not be able to make them." And, you know, I think the same goes for men. It goes for everybody. You know, I just want everybody to be free and on a level playing field and, you know, respected. But on, you know, and we need to be honest about the fact that what that will mean is not that we will have equal outcomes across all sectors of society. We absolutely won't. You know, you've got the gender equality paradox in the Nordic countries where they've done everything they possibly could to make the genders exactly equal and the outcomes equal, but they're like more the sort of occupations, workplaces are more gendered than anywhere else in the world, because, you know, people are making free choices. They've got extensive kind of safety nets in terms of like welfare and stuff like that. And so they literally do what they want. And what a lot of women want is, you know, to work in quite traditionally female professions. What a lot of men want is to work in quite traditionally male professions, and that is fine. And with regards to, you know, should women be able to dictate to men what they are, and should men be able to dictate to women what they are, my position is very simple, and that's if you're a human being, you have every right to have an opinion on any subject. You know, whether you should be, I mean, you know, the word dictating has connotations, and obviously I don't want anyone to be dictating to anyone else whether their lawful behavior is acceptable. But I certainly think that we can all have conversations about it all. Does that answer your question?
It's a sort of answer, but like, do you think well, dictating can be feedback, and like, or any feedback will be seen as dictating?
Yes, it could. And, you know, it can kind of be perceived as such, which is why I think, you know, I like Camille Paglia a lot. You know, she's a feminist, but she calls herself many different kinds of feminists. One of the ones I like particularly, she calls herself an Amazon feminist, and she's about empowering women and making women strong and brave. And what someone catcalled you, you've got to shout something back, you know. And it's all very kind of, she's her heritage is Italian, and it's very much a kind of gutsy Italian approach to being a woman. And so, you know, I think we need to be braver, you know, so that we can hear things that we don't like and not have a, you know, hysterics, not get upset, not feel intimidated, just be able to take in the information, you know, contextualize it, clarify it if we're not entirely sure, and, you know, reject it rationally if that's what we need to do.
Yeah, thank you for your
Anything else,
answer.
Max?
Thank you.
Okie dokie. So next, I think we're going to Max Anthony, and then after that, I think we'll probably go to Eleanor, and then I think we've got a couple more after that, and then I think we'll probably think about wrapping it up. Just because, if people want to, I would quite like to have this dialogue between the participants afterwards as well. So there we go.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I wanted to ask if you see any parallels between political violence in America currently, or particularly in America, and because you're a student of history, do you see any parallels between that and feminist violence, particularly in the past, which you're aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, there's that spirit of iconoclasm, of destroying images, that is often associated with radical ideologies, be they radical left-wing ideologies like feminism and, you know, what's going on in the States right now, or indeed whether it's kind of fascistic ideologies. It's not a left or right issue in that way, but there are there's a pattern, and you know, it's all to do with the fact that human beings are where images are very important to us, and so, you know, the destruction of images and kind of monuments and, you know, those kind of things are very meaningful, and they make a huge political statement, and they put a very clear kind of message across, I would say.
Oh, hang on. I'll just unmute Max again if you want to respond, Max.
Yeah, just thank you for answering.
Thank you for the question. Actually, on that subject, a really good book's just come out. It's called Iconoclasm, and it's by Alexander Adams, and I did start reading that last night. Thankfully, or I wouldn't have had a clue what to say to your question.
Yes, you would.
Wow.
Anyway, yeah. So go on to someone else.
Okie dokie. So I think we'll go to Eleanor next, and I think Sam afterwards, and we'll see what the time's doing after that. But yeah, I think Eleanor, I think you can unmute yourself. Okay.
So I was gonna ask, because there was some mention before of a phrase like patriarchy being quite reductionist, and I just thought it seemed kind of like also being against feminism and anti-feminist is kind of quite a reductionist concept to me in my brain, because obviously there's so many nuances within feminism, and also different topics that have been brought up today, such as suicide being higher in men. Again, there's lots of complexities that feed into that. It's not just about gender, and same with the gender pay gap. I think there's so many different complexities feeding into that. And, you know, one individual might be paid less in a certain job and it might have something to do with the fact they're a man. And, you know, in another profession, it might have something to do with the fact that you're a woman, but then it will also, that your gender won't be the only reason, it will be lots of different factors. So my question is, yeah, and I think you can be a feminist and critical of areas of the feminist movement as well. So my question is being against feminism reductionist, basically?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, you know, I know a lot about feminism at this point in my life, and you know, what I would say is that I am anti-feminist, not anti-every feminist. So, you know, I just mentioned that Camille Paglia, I have an enormous amount of love for. I absolutely adore her, and it completely bewilders me why she clings on, what possible, because she's a smart woman, she's bloody smart, and she criticizes, you know, feminism or the feminist movement, you know, all the time, and yet the word still resonates with her for some reason, and she clings onto it, which I don't understand. But I would never not listen to someone because they were a feminist, you know, and I tend to think most people have something valid and important and valuable to bring to the conversation. But having said that, what the mainstream has done, and what, you know, I don't know whether it's the Mott or the Bailey, I'm not sure which is which in this analogy that Sam brought up, but, you know, what feminist kind of lobbyists and people working within institutions are doing is so damaging that I feel repulsed by the movement, and I feel that it's very, very important to take a very clear stand against it.
And thank you for answering my question.
Thank you for the question.
Okay, so I think we're going to go to Sam, different Sam, and I think Charlotte had one more question. I think we'll probably wrap it up there. That's okay with everybody? Okay, so we'll go to, there you go, Sam.
Cool. So my question is, do you see any similarities between feminism and the Black Lives Matter movement? Or I think we've semi-touched on it. And if so, are you anti-Black Lives Matter?
Am I anti-Black Lives Matter, the statement or the movement?
You can decide.
Well, no, of course I'm absolutely not against the statement. The movement I have a lot of difficulty with. You know, it is tied up with iconoclasm, and with regards to our material world, you know, I'm fairly conservative. I think that history is important, and, you know, if there is, say, a statue of a slave owner somewhere, I think it's absolutely appropriate to put a plaque saying, you know, this human being was involved in some really awful things, you know, the statue was erected whenever it was, you know, and start a conversation about it. I don't think it's appropriate to hide it away in a museum or pull it down or chuck it into a river. Definitely not. And also, you know, so I've spoken to some British supporters of Black Lives Matter, and they have told me that the British police are not, they have no concern for Black lives, and I don't see how that's justified. I think our police do a really pretty good job, and with enormous restraint almost all of the time. And, you know, I don't see how it's going to have a positive impact on anyone to spread a malicious rumor like they don't care about Black lives. there is a disparity in the criminal justice system. So, a black man will be likely to be sentenced more harshly than a white man. It's dwarfed by the difference between, men and women, but it's still something that's unjust and needs to be fixed, essentially. But I don't see how all of the kind of chaos is going to be conducive to having proper intelligent discussions and changing hearts and minds so that we can actually fix the problems.
Okay.
Thanks for the question.
Okay, I think we'll go to Charlotte again quickly, and then I think we'll probably wrap it up there.
Hi again.
Hello.
So my question was very much to do with, because you mentioned before about getting catcalled and because you were talking in reference to a different feminist and their response to being catcalled.
Mm-hmm.
My question would be how your idea of feminism relates to sexual assault and its detrimental effect on women, and how, there's more cases of sexual assault towards women, and just kind of in that respect of how your view goes into that sector.
Yeah, interesting question. So, I think the problems for me with the feminist responses to like sexual assault and rape, I think that there is a catastrophizing about it, which is not necessarily going to help survivors. I think that you can give concern and sympathy, but still, be honest that human beings are anti-fragile, and, traumatic events that don't kill us more often than not make us stronger. And I also have a massive problem. I remember there was a university in the UK, and I forget which one, but some of the students there invented a nail varnish that if you dipped it in your drink while you were out, it would detect the presence of like date rape drugs. And so they brought that out, and I thought like that's a really, really good idea. How fantastic, it's going to allow women to protect themselves in that respect. And there was a feminist backlash because they said, oh, this is victim blaming. How dare you put the onus on women to not get raped? You should put the onus on men to not date rape women. And, unfortunately, there are damaged people who will hurt other people in the world. And so, this whole idea of victim blaming, while sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes things are really victim blaming, but sometimes, things are just taking responsibility for yourself, and it's like, I think we see with men, if you have, a man and he's walked drunk through a really dodgy area with his Rolex out for everybody to see, and he's mugged, people would be sympathetic, but they might also say, come on, man, like, what were you thinking? And, the fact that we can't do that with women, I think is silly. And I also think that it's not fair to these women, because, if you can convince a woman that got herself, from who was engaging in risky behavior and found herself in trouble, if you can really convince her that there was absolutely nothing that she could have done to prevent that happening, then isn't she going to spend the rest of her life absolutely terrified that whatever she does, she's always in danger?
I understand your point with that, but I think that it's very different between, someone stealing a watch and people saying, oh, it shouldn't have been stolen, because I think within that there's still blame on the mugger. There's still blame on, you know, he shouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
Which, or they shouldn't have done it. They shouldn't have mugged anyone. Whereas I think with victim blaming, it's more of, well, she was asking for it, or well, she deserved it because she was engaging in this. And I think that there's an element of the fact of, and it happens a lot in what I would consider rape culture, in identifying women as objects to get people to humanize them, which I just can't agree with, because it's constantly, oh, you know, what about your sister or your mother? Or, you know, if there was one I saw recently, which is essentially, if you like marry a virgin, it's essentially like having a brand new car. And there's always this element of it has to be related to someone else rather than having female autonomy. And I think even in that initial bit of, you know, what if someone gets mugged and they have a flashy Rolex, it's equating a Rolex on someone's arm to a physical being with sentience and thoughts and emotions and autonomy. And I don't see that correlation.
Yeah.
I'd say within these, I definitely say that men are the perpetrators of this. Do you know what I mean? It's a lot of the time it happens, sexual assault towards women, they're normally the victims of it, and it comes from men, and it has been very normalized in our society, to the fact that, you know, catcalls aren't seen as abnormal. They're not seen as a rape culture thing. They're seen as something that happens every day to most women.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think from my personal experience, I was experienced this type of thing when I was like 13, which, irrelevant to anything else, is such a young age and is entirely unacceptable in society. And I would say with entire confidence that a lot of people on this chat, perhaps all women on this chat, would have experienced a similar thing. And that would have been from, you know, men in vans or construction workers or...
I mean, I don't know whether it's my working class blood, but I enjoy a bit of catcalling personally. And I completely reject the hypothesis that catcalling is on a spectrum with sexual assault and rape. I think they're completely different. I think that when someone, you know, calls out, all right, gorgeous, or whatever, it's in a spirit of, you know, communication with a human being, and like, you know, just acknowledging feminine beauty, which is, you know, a joy that we should all engage in as often as possible, in my opinion. And you know, I take your point about the mugging and the rape not being, you know, on a continuum either, not on a spectrum kind of together. But, you know, I would agree with Jermaine Greer that, you know, what is more similar is the fact that, you know, and ridiculous is the fact that our young girls are more scared of penises than our young boys are scared of knives, you know. And I think similar kind of attitudes come out when men are physically attacked. Also, though, you know, I'm not convinced that women are the overwhelming majority of sexual assault and rape. Well, it depends how you define rape, but certainly not sexual assault victims. And I'm not convinced that the majority of perpetrators are men. We would have to have a bit of a exchange of data to settle that one, I think.
No, of course. I think I've got one more point because I know Tom wants to wrap it up and kind of get onto a discussion thing. But I just say one more thing is that I think that, because you said before, you know, women are more scared of penises than boys are of knives.
Yes, yes.
Which,
that was Jermaine Greer, who...
Which, yeah. So the only issue I would have with that is to do with, it's a similar statistic of people being like, you're more likely to be killed by a vending machine than a shark. And it's because those things are more frequent. Sexual assault happens to what I think it was one in 5 people before 18, and a quarter of the time it's by someone you know, and that's to do with rape statistics. So it's very, very frequent, and it's a very commonplace thing for girls to experience and for women to experience. And I think that there's more fear because, you know, of penises, because not only do you have the fear of the actual act being committed, but the stigma that comes along with it and the trauma that comes along with it, and the kind of response that you'll get from both sides of some women and men as well. So I think that there's, you know, there's that element to it as well. And I'd say that if women are more scared of penises than men are of knives, I'd say it's to do with the frequency and the normalization of it in society. If someone gets stabbed, everyone's going to agree and say that should not have happened and have sympathy for the victim. Whereas if someone gets raped, they'll have people saying, oh, it didn't happen, or there'll be people saying, oh, she was dressed in a certain way, or there'll be people saying, oh, but you know, she consented to it at the first and then, you know, decided later, or she was asking for it, or was flirting, or was whatever. And there'll always be so many more complexities to it. Whereas in a situation where someone's stabbed or mugged at knife point, your sympathies automatically go to the victim, and there's no question about that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a difficult crime to prove by its nature, you know, rape and sexual assault, because it will often happen where there is nobody around, and unless, you know, there is some evidence that puts the question beyond doubt, you know, then it's one person's word against another person's word. And so, of course, you know, someone who has been raped is likely to encounter people just asking questions, trying to ascertain the truth. And, you know, that's a sad kind of fact, unfortunately. But I don't see any particular ways to deal with that. That just seems to be unfortunate.
All right, thank you so much for answering my question.
Pleasure.
Okay, guys, I think we're going to probably wrap it up there. As I said before, if you would like to have a sort of moderated discussion after this in a sort of more informal setting, I'll be happy to moderate that, and I'm sure some members of the committee will as well. So just like let me know in the chat, or just stick around afterwards. And just a very big thank you to Elizabeth for doing this. I've had a very enjoyable evening, and I've loved the dialogue that's happened here. I thought it's been great. So yeah, again, thank you like so much for agreeing to come, and it's been
a real pleasure. It's so lovely to see everyone, and there's been really interesting, engaging discussion. I think it's been very productive. So thank you to everyone.
And just quickly, this has been recorded and it will be going up on both our YouTube channel and Elizabeth's YouTube channel. So do you just want to give us a quick shout out to that, what your YouTube channel's called, Elizabeth?
Well, yeah, this one will be going up on the Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them channel, which if you search J4MB on the search in YouTube, it will come up. Is everybody, I don't know, if anybody is not happy with being like